Hello, and welcome to the webinar, How CISOs Navigate Uncertainty, a Fireside Chat. My name is Lindsay Smith with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. I have a few administrative details to share with you, and then I'll turn things over to our esteemed speakers. First, we'd like to thank Rubrik for their partnership with today's event. They have been wonderful partners to Argyle and are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. So thank you again to Rubrik. We appreciate you joining us today. We also welcome you to stay socially connected during today's event. For those of you who are active on social media, please use the hashtag ArgyleDigital and follow us at Argyle Exec Forum. Also be sure to follow us on LinkedIn for special announcements. I also wanted to take a moment to touch on our content neutrality policy, which we have curated based on the feedback we've received over the years from our members. We've worked closely with our speaking faculty to ensure that you receive a set of balanced and neutral viewpoints during the session today, and we appreciate our members' support of this policy. Finally, and most importantly, we want to hear from you, so please submit all questions that come up during today's event into the chat section of the interface. Following the discussion, we have set aside time for our speakers to weigh in on your questions. Now, without further delay, I will turn the floor over to Stephen Stone, head of Rubric Zero Labs, to introduce our other speakers today. Welcome, Stephen. Over to you.
All right, everyone, thank you back to our third session as we talk about Rubrik Zero Labs' report of securing an uncertain future. I'm incredibly excited for this session for a couple of reasons. The first is we have two actual experts in how we secure an uncertain future. Aaron Hughes, Senior Vice President and CISO of Albertsons, and Amit Agarwal, the former head of security at Moderna. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The other reason I'm really excited for this is one thing we've done at Rubrik Zero Labs is we've actually worked with our CISO advisory board on this type of study. We've met with them twice. Our first report that we did, we spoke briefly about the trends and ideas. Our second Rubrik Zero Labs report, we actually went through a full after action with our CISO advisory board, and they gave us some really significant feedback on how to think about things from a CIO and CISO perspective. And then this third report, we've actually worked with them before it, and now as we roll it out and get their actual ground truth perspective on this. So with that, I'm just going to dive right into it. What I'd really like to start with Aaron and Amit, both of you. Aaron, I'll probably start with asking you first. One of the things that jumped out as we talked with the external organizations, those 1,600 organizations led by CIOs and CISOs, and they talked about in the last year, they endured a material loss of critical data. That could be from ransomware, that could be from production outages, malicious insiders, malicious code, also just misconfigurations, the whole gamut. But half of those organizations to 53% lost critical data last year, and 1 out of 6 reported multiple losses of material data. So, what I'd like to really do is kind of stress test that first. That number jumps out. Aaron, I'll kind of ask you first. Does that match what you see when you discuss with your peers on this topic?
Yeah, I was certainly intrigued by that statistic, and I think what piqued most of my interest was the characterization that the data loss was material. It's probably not the direction you want to take the question, but like as I talk to CISO peers, like the characterization of a material loss is something you certainly want to lean heavily on your legal partners, your outside counsel, and not as a tech organization CIOs or CISOs characterizing something as material. Now, presuming that that happened in these situations for 53% of the respondents, I do find that number to be incredibly large because we haven't seen like that uptick in filings with the SEC, right? The 8Ks that would be associated with some sort of
Yep.
material event. I don't discount that there has been like loss of data, access to systems of 53% of the respondents, but like the fact that it was characterized was material, we either have sort of underreporting for the public companies in the sort of survey, or I'd say it's a much larger issue than I would have imagined. I wouldn't have thought that 53% would have characterized it as material, but is my initial reaction to the statistic there.
And Amit, how does that match what you've seen in your experience?
Yeah, I think I am not surprised to see that data. I mean, I think everybody had some sort of a data breach to an extent. So I think I agree. And in fact, I am very impressed with the quality of this report. I mean, I think it was great data to present to the audit committee and to the boards. I was, there was some really great stats. I think one especially noteworthy for me was that 145% growth in the SaaS data. I think that is so relevant, and I feel that that's kind of makes our job so much more difficult, right? Preventing data breach in a SaaS environment is extremely difficult now. So that's kind of make it even more interesting to, like, how you can do deep integrations with security platforms like Rubrik or any other out there, like, and how you can continuous monitoring with insights and data analytics in terms of what is happening real time in the environment to kind of prevent data breach. I think that's kind of really very interesting. So I mean, you go to your board and say that, this is what the trends are, this is why you need the investments. I think a great report, and I don't disagree with any of that data that you have published. So very good. Keep up the good work.
Well, we
I would,
appreciate it.
I
Oh,
would
go
I
ahead,
would add
Aaron.
on to that, certainly, regardless if it's 53% or if it's 23%, like there's still an incredibly challenging environment where data security is top of mind for sort of all technology leaders. I
Yeah.
wouldn't argue with that point. I think my issue was the materiality of that data loss. That was just alarming to me and just not something I would have characterized just from talking to my peer group. That would have been over half of the respondents had a material event.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think
so
that's a
each
good
of you
point. Yeah.
mentioned something I'd love to pull the thread on a little bit. Let me start with Amit and the data growth, and the Aaron. I definitely want to circle back to the peer group, and you mentioned legal in particular. Where I definitely have something I'd like to speak about that. So, kind of focus on the data growth. That's one of the things that, honestly, as we especially engage with the CISO advisory board on our previous report, and we talked about things that were important to leaders, and our CISO advisory board, both of you highlighted our previous assessment that data was growing 25% year over year. As we expanded that data set, as we look back further, we actually had to correct our findings. We're seeing it's 42% if we encounter more than just 2022. And Amit, you mentioned that 145% SaaS data growth, clouds growing about 70%, and then we've got on premises growing right around 20%. One of the things I've seen in my previous experience working breaches is it's hard to secure anything that's growing and moving. And we used to look at that from an asset perspective, like 8, 9, 10%, actual physical asset growth. The data growth gives me pause as a network defender. I'm just not sure how we can even prepare to secure something that's growing at over 40% in a single year and what that means. I'd really like to get both of your perspectives on that. Amit, you kind of raised it, so I'll give you first swing. How are CISOs supposed to secure an environment that's growing at more than 40% a year from a data perspective?
Yeah, I think it's a very important question, and I'm sure everybody is thinking about it. I would not worry too much about the growth percentage, because I guess that's happening, and everybody understands that there's more and more data, right? But w- there's no replacement for getting basics right. That's the first thing that you need to do, right? Multi-factor authentication, least privilege access, data resilience, continuous monitoring with risk insights. Right? Everybody has to do it now. I think good thing is, like, what works in our favor now is, like, there are companies like Rubrik that can help you set up the infrastructure and provide these built-in data protection and governance capabilities, right? I mean, Rubrik is just one example. There are others as well, right? There's ton of investments done out there. You just kind of go and leverage that, right? What you really need to do is, your business better than anyone, right? So I mean, all organizations, in my point, is need to understand where your data is and what data is important for your business. I think, and that's kind of, like, it's surprisingly that majority of the companies don't understand that. They don't know where the data is and, like, what data is important for them. So once you do that and define the rules around that data, I think most of your job is done. And then I think and then there is, like, these platforms that you can actually leverage to kind of, really go and secure your data and manage that effectively. Is it easy? I don't think so. But I think, the heavy lift is you as a business working with your stakeholders, in every different business unit needs to be involved and then kind of go and use the platforms to kind of protect that. And that's kind of really how I see it. I mean, it's not going to be easy, and especially like SaaS providers, so that continuous monitoring and having an automatic response to kind of prevent those exfiltration and breach is going to be the most challenging piece. So I'll take a pause there.
And what about you, Aaron? How does that affect what you do as a CISO?
So I agree totally with Amit that the growth of data is not slowing down, right? Like every company has the buzzwords around digital transformation, digital enablement. We're creating more data, we're accessing more customers, both corporate data, customer data. That trend is not stopping. Also, would key in on the point that while security teams will provide the capabilities and tooling to support that or to govern or support that bloat, there's got to be partnership with legal on the retention of data. Like when can we eliminate data from the ecosystem? There's got to be partnerships if you're in an organization large enough to have a chief data officer that can help assist with the governance and classification and stewardship of the data such that it is not growing unfettered, unmanaged across the ecosystem. That's where it becomes incredibly hard for the security teams to secure data that is not well classified or characterized. Right? Is it company confidential, proprietary, something that you want to make sure doesn't leave the virtual walls of the company? Sort of where it is. Is it local storage on a laptop? Is it in a SaaS provider? Is it some on-prem data storage? Um, Again, I know that speaks to a lot of maturity in some programs around data governance, but like the tooling is there, as we've heard, to help secure. It's more of like the framework and governance around how to
Exactly.
manage it. And that's where
Yeah.
I'm really leaning heavily on my partners in legal and in our data governance organization, so that we aren't retaining data, excuse me, that's 40 years old, and that we have it in a sort of well managed state, so that once it is tagged, we know how to secure it.
Yeah, and Aaron, you've
100%
mentioned,
agree.
legal. You just mentioned governance, chief data officer, and that gives me just a perfect alley right back to the question I wanted to ask from the very first discussion, where you
Mhm.
mentioned the materiality assessment. So one of the things that we've heard from the CISO advisory board, and we talk about in the study, and we've had other conversations around, is this idea of democratizing security, bringing in other leaders other than just the CISO and the CISO's teams when it comes to security. And we see that a lot with data security. The CISO doesn't necessarily own all the levers for data or anything around it. So, Aaron, I'll kind of start with you, and Amit, I'd love to hear your perspective as well. That's easy for me as
Mhm.
a threat person to write into paper. That's easy for me to give as a recommendation. What's the reality of doing that, though, in a long term organization where everyone's working together and balancing a million priorities?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's actually a good 25 to 30% of a CISO's job nowadays is engaging other business leaders, influencing, sort of espousing like the imperative around, I know it's a bit cliche, but like security is everybody's responsibility. Security teams can deploy the tooling, but if you've got mismanaged practices, shared passwords, lack of adoption to MFA, like all the things that you've heard many times at conferences, like security will fail. Now, specific to the data security challenges, and again, I know it's unique based on the size and market of the company, but a lot of companies have created privacy teams under legal where a lot of the policies around data retention are owned, and to the degree that we again aren't maintaining a long lineage of data. And then on the governance side, like as long as the security team has a north star for how data is being governed and tagged, that's also just a key partnership to better enable the program. Now, at the end of the day, like rubber meets the road, the CEO and the board are going to look to the CISO to own the data security program, but that is only successful with the business relationships I laid out. And it really is, again, incumbent on the CISO to, manage that peer group to help make sure it's a team effort on that.
And Amit, I'm curious your experience. I mean, even just in your previous role at Moderna, that's a highly regulated space with lots of other requirements. How do you bring in your requirements and the things that you see in your experience on the security side and bring in other leaders to help solve these problems?
Yeah, I wish I could add anything more than what Aaron said. I mean, spot on, 100% agree. I think I had the exact same experience there. I think just if I may just quickly just touching on your last point, I mean, regulated environment. So that makes it a bit more challenging, for a company like Moderna and any other life science because, there's a lot happening in the manufacturing space and, the FDA and all the compliance that we need to have there. So typically what you will see is that there's like a lot of the, compliance being managed out of the manufacturing organization, and that's kind of where the partnership with the CISO team is extremely important. And I think that's kind of which is unique for the big pharma and on the life science companies. And I think that's kind of it's a bit of a challenge where how do you make sure that you don't go to an extreme and you have a one systematic approach towards everything that you do in the organization. And sometimes you will see that GXP is much more advanced than the traditional corporate security. So I think to bring that balance is a bit of a challenge. But as Aaron said, data security is overall a CISO responsibility, with budget being kind of still in the CISO's purview. But then you're working with all other business units to make sure that you're managing that. It's not easy, I think, given all the different priorities and how people want to work. I think it is really challenging, but that's kind of what your job is. I mean, and that's kind of really where, to Aaron's point, like most of your CISO time and effort should be to kind of bring the organization into alignment. So,
Well, I appreciate that from both of you. I think one of the things that's probably surprising me on this session alone is that we haven't talked about AI yet. I don't think there's any chance where three senior leaders in security can sit down and talk about anything without talking about the AI police showing up and making sure we ask that. So, one of the things we actually didn't focus on artificial intelligence much in this study. The only real way it came up was as we went back and looked at some of the reasons why we're seeing such data growth, this data explosion. AI is a piece of that. You need lots of data to create AI models, and you need AI to move through big data. So we really kind of looked at it as part of how we got here. What I'm really interested in is what's AI mean for us moving forward. So I'd kind of like to split the AI question in half and say, Amit, would you mind talking about what you think AI is going to do used against us? And maybe Aaron, how do you think on the security side, as defenders and sustainers, what should we be doing with AI moving forward? So let me kind of start with the bad news. Amit, what do you see AI being leveraged against us from an offensive
oh,
perspective, from an attacker perspective?
absolutely. I think there's nobody out there who's going to disagree with that. I think 100%, right? So as we use more and more, people will try to figure out like how you can exploit that. There are going to be bad actors using adversarial AI. My worry is, like most of the people who are going to use artificial intelligence, they probably don't understand, the algorithms and the math behind it, right? Those artificial intelligence models. And it is fairly easy to poison those models, right? I mean, and especially when you are relying more on those foundational models more and more, right? So if you have a bad learning of the model, it could be easily exploited. So I mean, a lot of people would say, oh yeah, those models are reliable, but you don't know if they have been poisoned, right? There's other ways to kind of do that as well. So that's kind of my bigger concern on one. And then I think the big one that I really get afraid of is deepfake. So I mean, the impact of that on the world is we'll just have to go and see. I mean, what do you really trust and believe nowadays, right? I mean, so did that if the world leader said something and it can create a huge impact on the world? I mean, so those are like, a few things that I really worry about. But is that like, well, should that stop us of using AI? Absolutely not. I think that's the future. And if somebody, there's so countless benefits. So, and they're going to be always a battle between a good and bad. So I don't think that that will be ahead of the curve and then proactively say that we can protect all the exploit or prevent all the exploits. So it's just going to be like, a battle versus good and evil, and defenders versus attackers, as we have seen in the cyber world. So, but AI is the future. So, but I'm definitely seeing that it could be misused. And if you're part of the RSA, I mean, one of the big concerns everybody was talking about is, you know, how do we protect ourselves from all these exploits? So I'll let Aaron talk about like how what we can do good about it. But I think there's a lot of big concerns out there. So.
Yeah, no, I would just add on in the concern dimension, mention it a little bit in the deep fakes, but it really lowers the bar for like crafting of a phishing email, because you can sort of, and we actually did some exercises to use some of the LLMs to craft phishing for our senior executive population, and it, like, with some minor tweaks, was sort of like spot on for something that a retailer would open up. So again, that the challenge there, and that's the super lowest hanging fruit, very easy to do, but poisoning the models and some of the brand reputational damage that could come from that is also, also puts us in a bit of a perilous position. Now, on the positive side, there's the certainly like the resource augmentation part of having capabilities like security copilot and things that can help analyze your code or more rapidly make connections when you're doing incident response capabilities, tying certain activities that happened either network wise or email wise or data that your SIM has collected, and really making your SOC analysts much more efficient. So it's just sort of the time enablement that will come from AI in that use case. Certainly you need to have considerations around the data security, especially if you're using some of the LLM capabilities as a corporation to enable training on your processes or engagement of your customers. You want to make sure that none of your data, the corporate data, is going in the big public models, right? So a lot of companies have super indexed on, like, basically blocking that access from corporate networks. In addition to sort of the resource augmentation of some capabilities you can deploy, I think there'll be a lot more efficiencies just that come from the vendors that security programs are partnered with. Like, that's the story I tell my board right now. It's not that at Albertsons Companies we're developing any bespoke Gen AI capabilities in house, but that the vendors we are partnering with, whether that's from our email security or from our endpoint detection and response or from some of our data security partners, like, they're embedding Gen AI and automation into their tooling, which will make that tooling more useful for us and help us run a more efficient program. Certainly for folks in, like, a non-tech native company like I am, that's the real enablement, where we won't have the engineering resources to sort of build our own tooling around Gen AI advancements.
Yeah,
Yeah, Aaron,
I think Aaron.
your comments around. I'm sorry. Go ahead, on me.
Yeah, I was saying it applies to every organization, not just specific to what Aaron mentioned. I mean, it may be more relevant to him, but I think it's the same problem everybody's facing, and I 100% agree with what he said. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things that really jumped out at me is the discussion about good news, and I think we definitely talked about this in the previous Zero Labs report, and we see the same thing in this recent report. It's really easy to see the bad news. It's really easy to see all the things that are going to make CISOs' jobs even harder than they are and more complicated. But as we really did the 5 year projections and then applied recommendations, those projections, what really jumped out and was just unavoidable is those fundamentals. Doing some of those low cost, high impact fundamentals demonstrably change the outcomes a year from now, 5 years from now. And I think that really shifts a lot of things around, from not just preventing what happens today, but how are we actually building resilient organizations? It's one of the things that the CISO advisory board here at Rubrik has challenged us to research on, is like, how do you actually look at resilience and do that in a strong, sustainable way? And so that leads me to this next question, which is, those things seem to pay off. That all the projections, all the models, all the numbers point to one way, But again, that's easy for me to run analytics. It's a whole different thing to do that in an organization. So I guess starting with Aaron, would you mind talking about when you look at resiliency, when you look at how to secure an organization from who knows what's coming 5 years down the road, how does that message land at an organization like Albertsons, and how do you do that effectively?
Well, I mean, I think resiliency comes from planning and assuming that the bad day will happen, right? If you just assume that you'll have status quo and operational uptime and no outages and no breaches, I think you've sort of failed from the outset. So really, instituting the right processes that can help you then get to the recovery phase that comes from that would be a component of resiliency. So planning for failure. Also, to the degree it's possible, I know for like companies that have been late to digital transformation and data growth, but like to the degree that you can govern the bloat of the data where it is allows you to be more refined in what you need to develop to be resilient. I think that's a big challenge for massive corporations. Data is everywhere. Data is on individual endpoints. Data is in the cloud. Data is on prem, and it is certainly untagged and unmanaged. And I think that creates challenges with resiliency. I think if you're approaching it and you're with a company that has sort of that initial outlook, like dimension the data that is most important, right? Like where are the key corporate assets? Where's the company corporate PII? Where's your customer information? I think if you start from that standpoint and sort of go down the pyramid, I think you can at least make some headway into how you would provide some resiliency capability without spending, 7, 8 figures to protect the super estate.
I think that makes a lot of sense. That matches a lot of what we see and what we hear from our organizations. Amit, how does that map to what you've seen over your time
Yeah, I
securing
mean,
organizations?
no, I mean, 100% agree. I guess don't know if I should add anything. Maybe just few things, right? I mean, as you said, get your basics right. Absolutely, first thing. Uh, make sure make sure that you know where your data is. I mean, which is difficult, and what data is important for you. And then, I mean, plan for failure and make sure that I mean, most of the people, I think now, most of the organizations are getting data resiliency to a point where I think it's improving on a faster rate than protecting data breaches, to be very honest. I mean, it's just, if you know where the data is, you leveraging some security platforms, it gives you 90% there already in terms of data vaults, protection. You can restore it. It's there. I think the challenge is more around how to really get real-time data insights, and can you prevent data breach? Because the latest ransomware, they would just not encrypt your data, and will kind of you they will steal your data as well. Once the data is exfiltrated, then how do you it's too late for you, right, at that point. So the only way to protect that is to really do it real time. So if you have the insights to know what is going on, and have a risk score around each data access, I think that's what you potentially have a higher chance of being successful to prevent data breaches, right? And insider threat is another problem that everybody's facing as well. But again, I mean, with the same concept, it can be applied in both in insider and external threats. But I think that's kind of where I would say is a bit more challenging, and a lot more investment needs to happen. And good thing is we have the AI, and the machine learning to kind of do this process automation, the automatic response. It's going to take some while, I think, but I have confidence, and I feel that there's so much of investments happening in that space, and there are platform companies who are putting so much of effort there, so that we as organizations don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can just leverage what you guys are doing, and then just focus on our business problems, and then let the technology and the execution be managed by the platform company. So again, know your data. That's the difficult part, where it is. Put the data rules around it, and then leverage a platform to kind of really do the part. it's a recipe for success and can be easily replicated across the organizations. So then we can be ahead of the game, and otherwise we'll be always be catching up. So my 2 cents there.
Yeah, well, I'd like to end it kind of on a little more of a fun question. Amit, you mentioned, catching up and looking back and looking forward. As a reformed researcher and analyst, I love looking back how we got here. I love seeing what that means moving forward. But I kind of make that a little more personal. I'd like to kind of ask each of you to end this great session with, if you could go back 5 years and tell yourself something that you've learned and make yourself better for where we're at today, what would that be? What would be the one thing you would tell yourself 5 years ago that you wish you had in your pocket? Amit, I'll kind of ask you first, put you in the hot seat.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question, and and I think I have given some thought to it, to be very honest, in the past as well. Like, what would I do differently? And one thing and honestly, from the bottom of my heart, I think what I've learned over a period of time is this is a battle, right? It's an ongoing battle between bad actors and 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 good actors as well. And then you cannot do this alone. You need an army, right? So I mean, would I do anything different on the technology side? I mean, I knew what I knew at that time, right? I mean, there's not much I would change on that side. But one thing I would definitely change if I could go back 5 years, is go back and invest in building the skill sets and the pipeline on the for the cybersecurity professionals. I mean, I don't think I did enough to help the community and share the information, go out there to the colleges and institutes and motivate the young students to kind of really be excited about cybersecurity and what is there. And I think we are significantly short of skilled resources, and then we're going to be, in fact, more and more given where we are going. So if we don't invest in that now, I think we will be like really in trouble in the future, right? I mean, because I think we are losing good talent on other jobs, and like and we will probably be struggling more and more. So that's my answer. Yeah, go back and invest in building the skills and giving more to the community on getting the people excited about cybersecurity. That was what I would do.
I love that. How about you, Aaron? What would today Aaron tell yesterday, Aaron?
Can we put aside maybe investing in some chip companies 5 years ago?
Yeah, that's a good
That's
place to
something we
start.
all wish we all wish we would have done with the advancements in AI that we just talked about. But as Amit said, like the principles of security haven't changed much in the last 5 years. But in terms of like a component of security that I would have wished I would have emphasized more, it's really about getting identity right. I think what we see now is a lot of breaches are enabled by abuse in legitimate identities. And to the degree that we would have been could have been early adopters in passwordless, or using some human factors or non-phishable second factors. I think that would have prevented a lot of pain that we've seen companies go through over the last 5 years. So probably indexing a little more heavily on what I knew about sort of the identity architecture space and how identities and the accesses and entitlements that those identities have are used to really enable a lot of the breaches that we see today.
Well, gentlemen, I appreciate both of you joining us in this session. I, as always, appreciate the CISO Advisories Board's efforts to help guide where we're going and the research that we're focusing on. So just again, one last thanks for joining us today. I appreciate it.
Thank you
No,
so
thank you.
much. Our pleasure. Have a good one.
Thank you, Stephen, Aaron, and Amit, for such an insightful session. This concludes today's webinar, and I want to thank everyone for joining us today for this fantastic virtual event. And thank you again to our partner, Rubrik, and enjoy the rest of your day.